Hi, Peter Jones, Chartered Surveyor, author and property investor. One of the things which I come across from time to time is investors who are otherwise very specific and very earnest in what they do, but who tend to buy in a rather haphazard way without really thinking about investment fundamentals. And I suppose that's a little bit of a surprise in one sense, because if you're going to spend thousands of pounds or hundreds of thousands of pounds or even millions of pounds on properties, and particularly if you're going to be doing that largely with bank finance, which is what property usually requires, you would imagine that anybody doing that would probably take their time to think it all through and to try and buy using what we could call the property investment fundamentals. And I think one of the problems with being in the UK is we're so used to buying our own homes that perhaps we try and apply the same rules for buying our own home as we do to buying investment property. And of course, it's a completely different animal. There's different rules apply. It's not the same thing at all. And so sometimes when I meet new investors or would-be investors, they often talk about buying properties nearby because they want to manage them themselves. There's a whole discussion we could have about that, whether we should manage our own properties. Personally, I don't manage any of my properties. I don't intend to. But they want to buy nearby for that reason. Or they just buy a property because there's some kind of emotional attachment, like it's the kind of property which they quite like to live in. Now, of course, I'm sure that many of us know that that's not the right way to buy property. Now, I don't want to sound like I'm judging them too harshly, because at the end of the day, even if they buy a property like that for the wrong reasons, they're doing it in good faith and they're buying a property. They're actually taking action. And of course, taking action is the key if you're going to be successful. Only about 5% of the population are actually action takers. The other 95% are going to talk about it but never actually do anything. So credit to them for taking action. But we want to refine it a little bit and tweak it a little bit so that we're doing it properly. So what are the investment fundamentals? Well, cash flow, that's a big one. Why? Because if we're going to buy a property which we're going to let out, we need to make sure that the cash flow is there to cover things like the mortgage costs. Now, I'm assuming that you're going to be buying with a mortgage because there's very good reasons why you should buy with a mortgage. Again, that's a discussion for another time. So we don't want to be buying properties for cash. Even if we were multi-millionaires and could buy properties for cash, we don't want to do that. So we're going to have a mortgage. So we need to make sure that the cash flow is there to pay the mortgage. Why? Because if the tenant ever disappears, or if we can't find a tenant, we don't want to be paying for that mortgage out of our own monies. That's not the idea. That's not investing. That's having a liability and not an asset. So the cash flow has to be there, number one. We want to make sure that the return on our own money invested is maximised to the full. So we need to be buying probably at a fairly cheap price, a bargain price, what's nowadays known as below market value, for example, to maximise the return on our own money invested. That's a key investment criteria that we need to think about. We need to think about the prospects of future capital growth. Now, if we're buying for cash flow, future capital growth shouldn't be obviously at the forefront by virtue of buying for cash flow. Cash flow is going to be the most important thing. But maybe we want to have one eye on future capital growth, and maybe that's going to help steer us towards a particular area where we're going to buy, where we feel that there may be good prospects of future capital growth, either because historically there's been good capital growth, or because perhaps there's going to be infrastructure improvements which are going to boost the locality and produce future capital growth. That's another one. We want to think about how easy it's going to be to rent the property out. Why? Because we don't want to buy a property no matter how cheap, no matter what bargain it is. If we can't let the property out, it's just going to cost us money because we'll be subsidising it for the reasons we've just talked about. We don't want to do that. So we've got to make sure that there's plenty of rental demand. We need to make sure it's going to be occupied by the right type of tenant. And last but not least, we need to be thinking about our exit. If we ever had to sell the property, how easy is it going to be to sell? If it's in a poorer area, can we sell it to another investor? Will there be investor demand to buy the property off us? If it's in an okay area, can we sell it on to owner-occupiers or investors? These are the things that we need to be thinking about. There's a lot more to buying property than just buying the property down the street because it's going to be easy to manage. So I hope that helps. A few ideas there. Let me know what you think. Here's to successful property investing.